Hello and greetings from Dallas, Texas. I think this may be the first Flinn Talk ever recorded outside the great state of Arizona. But my name is Jake Batsell. I'm a Flinn Scholar from the class of 1992. Grew up in Prescott, Arizona, and I'm here today with...
And my name's Nathan Johnson. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and I was the original Flinn class in 1986.
And we're very excited to be here with you today to talk a little bit about our Flinn experiences and how it shaped us into who we are today and the doors that it opened for us. I'm going to be assuming sort of the interviewer role here because I am an associate professor of journalism at Southern Methodist University here in Dallas. I'm also the William O'Neill Chair in Business Journalism. But I have a background in reporting, reported for the Dallas Morning News and the Seattle Times. And I'm sitting here next to state senator for northern Dallas, and Nathan is actually my state senator, and I'm curious to talk to him a little bit about his path and how the Flinn helped make that happen as well. So I'm really going to be kind of in interviewer mode here, but to quickly sum up my story, I grew up in Prescott, Arizona. I've always had a really strong interest in journalism. Was the editor of my high school newspaper, the Badger at Prescott High, and really knew I wanted to go into journalism. And so what the Flinn really did for me was served as a catalyst to really propel my college journalism experience. The Flinn community had a big part to do with that. Chris Mays was the editor-in-chief of the state press and was a fellow Flinn Scholar and also a classmate at Prescott High School. And so I got involved with the state press right away. I wrote my first story for the school newspaper before I even took my first class at ASU. But the Flinn Scholarship also, in terms of mentorship opportunities, introduced me to some really valuable mentors at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism that helped shape my career, and actually had the immense privilege to meet Walter Cronkite and moderate a discussion with Flinn scholars about journalism. And the other thing is with the study abroad opportunities, I had the chance through the Flinn study abroad support to intern for the Arizona Republic's Washington, D.C. Bureau, and then also an internship in Zimbabwe for a newspaper in Zimbabwe. And all of those things really combined for a very focused experience on journalism in college. I'd like to think that the Flinn really helped serve as a rocket booster that accelerated my journalism career. I ended up going to work as a reporter for the Seattle Times and Dallas Morning News. And then now am teaching journalism at SMU. So my Flinn experience was a very focused experience that was enhanced immeasurably by the Flinn Scholarship. But what I wanted to talk with Nathan about...
Well, I want to talk about you, though. but in addition to the rocket boosters it gave you, you were a very intense, focused individual who knew what he wanted to do, and it gave you avenues. It gave you places where that intensity could be channeled. So that you were able to really take what you had to offer and grow it.
Absolutely.
In a way that you couldn't have otherwise.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I'm so grateful for that, and ranging from the chance to meet not just with Walter Cronkite but with other figures in other disciplines, and to be part of that Flinn community as well, which is a really unique experience. But Nathan's route was more...
circuitous?
Circuitous, is that a good way of putting it? A lot of more varied interests. We had a little bit of a chance to talk before this, and I know that you graduated from U of A in physics, but you also have a background in music. And then went on to law school. You're a lawyer now, and now serving in the state senate. So can you talk a little bit about who you were in 1986? You heard about this Flinn Scholarship thing, and you talk a little bit about your path and how it evolved.
Well, we were both intense kids in high school, which I think is common to every Flinn Scholar. And you were intensity with direction, and I was more of a scattered rays of intensity. Okay. I mean, I took everything very seriously, But I was unable and unwilling to really declare one thing, and that just wasn't how my head worked. My head was in lots of places. The Flinn gave me the Flinn Scholarship, the whole Flinn experience gave me the opportunity to pursue a lot of those things at a serious level simultaneously, which was helpful. But it wasn't always the easiest way to shape a life. It's all worked out very well at the moment. And I can trace back to those years as a Flinn Scholar and be grateful that it set me on this path. But I wasn't quite sure what the path was at the time. So I think towards the end we'll have some advice, and I'll say how not to do it like me, although things have worked just fine. I think you also asked about who I was at the time.
Yeah.
I was a kid with interest in science and music and latent interests in the way we organize ourselves as a society. And it took a number of years and a number of experiences, many of them through the Flinn Scholarship, to realize that my strongest passions were in how we organize ourselves as a society, how we get along, how we create an environment in which human beings can flourish. But all those other experiences, the music, athletic pursuits, art, science, those shape your head. And all those individual experiences carve little trenches in your brain so that later on, when you have to think in a different way, you can. Probably a wilder answer than we anticipated, but I do feel like that has been one of the greatest benefits of my early educational years is the versatility in thinking and an appreciation for a broad array of people and experiences.
All right, so take us back to 1986. You get a letter in the mailbox saying you're a Flinn Scholar. Or was it not?
It was weirder than that.
Okay.
I was applying to go off to college elsewhere, and I got a letter that said there's this thing called the Flinn Scholarship, and it pays for all your college experience. And it was short, and it was handwritten, and I thought it was a hoax. Well, if you're going to pay, it pays for books, right? It pays your cost of it. Was
right.
Too good to be true, and it was kind of late.
Uh-huh.
And I remember Barbara Barnes at the time told us about the working around the clock to try to get these out the door. It almost didn't happen that year. They barely got it out the door. Lucky for me and the other 19 of us, they did get it out the door.
Yeah.
And I eventually learned it was not a hoax, and we took it seriously and applied, and happily became one of the first class.
Yeah.
And I still have some great friends who were also lucky enough to have received that letter.
So then it's 1990, you graduate from U of A with a degree in physics. You have aspects of your career also involving music and composing music for Dragon Ball Z, the animated program, a Japanese anime program. So tell us a little bit about
all that stuff happened.
Yeah, how it all came together.
Well, I was a physics student and was fascinated with the field, but I felt that there were people who could do it better than I could. And I had become very interested in the law. So I went off to law school. While I was in law school, I discovered that across the street was the music building. So I started studying with the piano performance faculty there. I had always composed very bad music. And I stopped composing to learn to become a better player so that my hands could express what my mind might be able to think up. Came out of law school a pretty good piano player, and went to work and started writing music again, and it was still very bad. I didn't have enough to do as a young lawyer, and I wasn't particularly enamored with the profession. I think that part of that is because I was kind of scatterbrained and not very focused. And honestly, I don't think I had the professional maturity at the time to really focus on being a lawyer, and I was still distracted by music. I met an internationally acclaimed composer who lives in Richardson, Texas, which is part of the greater Dallas area, Robert Xavier Rodriguez.
Yeah.
And unlike other people, he was the first person to tell me that my music was crap. But he was impressed that I could write it with no training. And he said, if you study, you might write something worthwhile someday. So you can study with me, but don't quit your day job. And so I didn't, and I worked as a lawyer, but I gradually got deeper and deeper into music, and I migrated out of law and into music, and I committed a number of years to trying to make it as a classical composer, which was probably a miscalculation given the way the world works. And then I decided I wanted to make a living and get into commercial music, and that didn't work either. So I had set a clock, I quit, and I went to open up a law office on my own. And the company that owned the building that I wanted to lease owned the animation company that publishes Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, wow.
And in chit chat, it came up that I had written music. They went to my website, they listened to it. The next day, the producer called and said, "We want to hire you." And I went to work and wrote Dragon Ball Z for a number of years, and some other things. Eventually, that career path, I wouldn't say it closed, but due to economic forces, most of my clients ran out of money. And I was actually making a living finally as a composer at the time. And I had to choose between writing advertising music, which I have never liked and still don't like, and there are people who are good at it and love it. And I thought, why don't I let them write advertising music? I don't know how to do one other thing. And so I went back to being a lawyer. And we opened up a 2-person law firm, and I had a wife who was a lawyer and 3 kids, and it was a busy, pretty good life going along. And so that's where I was for the last 10 years. But still nagging at me was a political aspiration. And I admit it was an aspiration, not just an interest. But it looked impossible. And also I felt like I wasn't prepared for that. I didn't really know what I was doing or talking about in the political world. I wanted to reestablish myself professionally. And I wanted to know my city, and I wanted to know the state that I lived in and how it works before I took anything politically seriously. So over the past decade or so, I got involved in various public interest things, so that if the door should ever open, I'd be ready to kick it the rest of the way. Walk through it.
Right.
Yes.
And you walked through that door last year, becoming elected to the state Senate, the first Democrat elected to the seat in more than 30 years, in the district representing North Dallas. So when you think now as a public servant and as someone who's involved in public service and public life, when you think back to your college experience, your Flinn experience, what aspects, even though it was a while ago, informed your passion for public service, and do you find yourself calling upon now?
There were a couple of things. One general and one specific. As a general matter, you're in an environment with a bunch of highly accomplished, highly motivated young people like yourself, and you kind of propel each other to go out and make use of yourself, right? And I think that's lurking in the mind of anybody who runs for office, whether you like their politics or not. Most people are in there because they want to make use of what they have and bring some good to the world, right? And there's an expectation. Someone's paying for my college. Someone's sending me on trips. Someone's introducing me to important people. You feel an obligation to make good of it. And I think that has been at the back or the front of my mind my whole life. Specifically, there was a meeting, and the politics of it is a little odd, but it was a meeting with Barry Goldwater, the legendary Arizona senator.
Yes.
King of conservatism.
Right.
And he met with just 20 of us in a quiet little meeting, and it was fascinating. And he explained to us something about what it means to be a conservative. Well, many years later, I was running for office in a seat that had been Republican for 30 years, that everybody understood had more Republicans than Democrats, and no one thought I could win it because I would have to get Republicans to vote for a Democrat. Which to me didn't sound all that hard, given the political environment that I was facing. But what I did is I called on something Barry Goldwater said. I told ideologically mixed audiences that Barry Goldwater, and boy do I have their attention at that moment, explained to me that a fundamental principle of being a conservative is looking back in time and seeing what worked and doing that. And I said, there's got to be a corollary to that. Look back in time and see what didn't work and stop doing it. So then I would look back at certain supposedly conservative principles that were failing, empirically failing, terribly, inexcusably failing. Let's stop doing what doesn't work and start doing what does work. That's a conservative way of thinking. And it was enough to get people's attention. And once you have their attention, you can sit there and talk as human beings, as people who are interested in fixing things. And once they begin to doubt what's happened in the past, their mind's open to what can happen now. It was an important it was an important thing for me to be able to call upon, and it affected my thinking.
Well, and it was effective as well. I mean, I remember reading the profile of you in the Dallas Morning News, where you were going around knocking door to door on Republican voters, doors and making your case to them. You were able to convince enough bipartisan voters to be elected to this seat. That sounds, it was fascinating to hear that Barry Goldwater might have, helped plant a seed for that as a Flinn Scholar, 30 years ago. So I guess to kind of sum up a little bit, so you've, again, background in science, background in music, the law, now politics, like you said, a little more circuitous and varied as opposed to my own path, which was more specifically focused on journalism. But when you think about advice to people who might be considering a Flinn scholarship, who have varied interests but maybe aren't completely certain of the path that they eventually want to take, what would you tell your younger self, or someone like you who's who has varied interests but maybe aren't certain what the future holds and how it's going to unfold?
I think that the Jake Batsell path is a very good one. I think it's one to emulate. For those who have difficulty with that, like I did, it is okay to have varied interests, and it can work well for you. But it can also derail you and make you unable to contribute. And there were passages in my life when I felt like I was derailed. So I thought of it, I was trying to think of an analogy for this, and I think of it like swimming. Even though I wasn't a swimmer, y'all can imagine being a swimmer in high school, and all through high school, and probably even college. You're swimming and there's lane lines. All you gotta do is go, and you win a lot of the time, and it works. And you exit college, and the lane lines are removed. In fact, the whole pool is gone, and you're replaced with the ocean. You gotta look up every now and then and see where you're going. And I actually can think about some open water swims I did a couple times where I was swimming, and I looked up, and the whole field was somewhere else. I was going the wrong way. I don't want to let this analogy go too far, but I have to take one more. There was another open water, and you're supposed to swim around a buoy. But there was a storm the night before, and the buoy had become unmoored and floated out. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the landscape changes on you. And it's important to keep your head down and be very intense, but you got to look up every now and then and say, where exactly am I going? And swimming hard right now, where's it going to take me? And what do I do when I get there? Am I just going to keep swimming? No, go somewhere and do something, and do it well. But then again, look up and think, is this where I want to be? Is this where I'm most useful? Don't be afraid to make the leap. And that's where this diverse background can be helpful. If you're intense and sincere in all those different things you're doing, you have them available to you to call upon. You might call upon them professionally, or you might just call upon them personally, spiritually, in terms of how you feel about life, how you look at the world. And believe me, out there in the world it can be rough, and to have an anchor, even if it's just an avocation that you once were serious about, can stabilize you in life. So there's not a magical path. The important thing is that you be very sincere about what you're doing, but honest with yourself. Am I going the right way? And look up often enough to reset your bearings if you need to. Maybe you hit right on it, but if you haven't, it's very important. People have invested a lot in you, and you've got a lot to offer. Figure out how you can take the pieces of your life and assemble them so that you can be effective.
Terrific. Well, I think that's a great note to wrap up on. Thanks so much for tuning in to our Flinn Talk, and thanks forever to the Flinn Foundation for
thank you to the Flinn
opening
Foundation.
Doors for us and sending us on our respective paths, which are different, but we benefited enormously from. So thanks very much, and hope to see y'all back in Arizona.